Today, we're diving deep into a really specific and honestly pretty confusing form of control. It's not about someone being loud or aggressive or obviously breaking the rules. Nope, it's the total opposite. It's a system or someone's goodness, their supposed perfection, actually becomes a cage. We're talking about something called virtue-based coercion, and how that very human drive to be a decent person can get twisted into a weapon.
You know, the most striking truth about the moral punisher is that they don't control you by being bad. They control you by being perfect. We generally assume that a manipulator is going to break the rules, right? But in these kinds of high-pressure dynamics, it's your own biological drive to be decent and good that gets used against you, turning every single human mistake into some profound moral failure.
And that leads to this really core question. Why does a person who claims to have the highest values end up making you feel like a monster for just having a boundary? This is the central paradox of virtue-based coercion. It's that exact moment when your own conscience and your fear of being seen as wrong are turned into the very mechanism of your own psychological containment. It's wild, but it's how our brains get tricked into seeing judgmental dominance as ethical guidance.
So to really get how this works, here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we're going to tackle the perfection paradox itself. Then we'll get into how a conscience can be hijacked using a very specific vocabulary of control. After that, we'll lay out the predictable three-step takedown they use. We'll look at the psychology of both people involved, authority versus approval, and finally, we'll talk about some tools you can use to start reclaiming your own reality.
All right, let's jump right into section 1, the perfection paradox. This is all about how someone's so-called righteousness gets turned from a personal value into a social weapon. And listen, it's not about them actually being a saint. It's about how their performance of being a saint becomes this fortress that's used to trap your voice and your needs.
The official name for this is virtue-based coercion. And let's be really clear here, this isn't about diagnosing someone, it's about describing a pattern, an observable system of interaction. It's a system where your own inner voice, your conscience, that part of you that wants to be a good person, is slowly, systematically recalibrated until it starts serving the controller's agenda. You basically end up policing yourself just to avoid the shame of them labeling you unworthy.
So, how is this actually done? Well, that brings us to section 2, the hijacked conscience. We're about to look at the specific words, the vocabulary, that's used to pull this off. And understanding these terms is so important because it gives you the language to describe what might otherwise just feel like a confusing emotional fog.
So the first big concept comes right out of behavioral science. It's called altruistic punishment. This is a documented cognitive shift where any kind of dissent, setting a boundary, having a different opinion, it's not just a disagreement anymore. Oh no, it gets completely rebranded as a deep moral failing, a sin. And this move is psychologically brilliant because it lets the controller justify punishing you as something noble, like they're doing it for the good of the family or the company or the cause.
And that leads right to the next thing, value identity hijacking. Look, we all have a sense of inherent dignity, right? The feeling that we're worthy just because we exist. This process systematically rips that out and replaces it. Your self-worth is no longer a given, it becomes conditional. It completely depends on your ability to constantly prove your goodness to the person who has set themselves up as the ultimate judge. You go from being a whole person to being someone who is always seeking their approval.
So why does the target accept this? Well, that's where the sanctity hook comes in. This is a belief, a pattern that starts to take root in your mind. It's the assumption that because the controller seems so pure, so committed to these high standards, they must have the right to enforce those standards on you. You actually start to believe you're lucky that such a good person is even paying attention to you, which makes you reinterpret their control as helpful guidance.
The actual day-to-day experience of this is often described with this incredibly powerful term, ethical asphyxiation. People in these dynamics literally report a feeling of being physically suffocated. It's the pressure of constant scrutiny, where every single action, every word, every thought is being put under a microscope and examined for its moral purity. It is absolutely exhausting. It's paralyzing.
And the end result of all this is that the target starts to feel fundamentally guilty for the most basic human needs, privacy, autonomy, even joy. Those things start to feel selfish or like a sin. Your own conscience, the very part of you that's supposed to be your guide, doesn't belong to you anymore. It's been turned into a leash and someone else is holding it.
Okay, so how does this play out in the real world? It might feel chaotic when you're in it, but the source material shows it's actually a systematic, predictable pattern. And that brings us to section 3, the three-step takedown. We're about to see the machine in action.
Here is exactly how the cycle works. Step 1 is the virtue standard. The controller sets up this moral high ground, and at first, it might even feel kind of inspiring. Wow, they're so principled. But really, it's a test of your submission. Then comes step 2, the sin identification. This is the critical move. A totally practical problem. Let's say you're just too tired to help with a project. Is no longer a practical problem, it gets rebranded as a character defect. You're not tired, you're selfish. And then step 3, the penance phase. Your brain is biologically wired to want social harmony, so you apologize or you give in just to be forgiven. And then the controller points to your apology as absolute proof of your original sin.
It all boils down to a really simple emotional logic. The controller's performance of righteousness is designed to trigger your shame, and that feeling of shame is what gets you to compliance. Their outrage creates your shame, which locks you in. It's a clean, effective, and just devastatingly simple sequence.
And when this cycle repeats over and over again, the long-term result is something called character inversion. This is a deep, deep cognitive shift. Your brain gets conditioned to see your own independent needs, the need for rest, for space, for your own opinion, as moral failings. And at the same time, your compliance, your submission to their control, gets reframed as something holy. Giving up your needs becomes the ultimate proof that you're a good person.
So we've seen how this works. Now let's talk about why. Section 4 gets into the psychology of both the controller and the target, and it frames it as this conflict between the need for authority and the need for approval.
This slide really lays out the whole push and pull of the dynamic. On the controller's side, the motivation is often for absolute authority. Think about it. If they can own the very definition of right and wrong, they have all the leverage. They use something called pro-social aggression, justifying their control by saying they're defending a noble cause like the family or our mission. Then on the other side, the target's vulnerability is often a really deep need for moral approval. They've been taught to value being good more than being a separate person, and that is what gets exploited.
So with all of this, what on earth can be done? Well, this final section isn't really about an escape plan. It's about something way more fundamental: reclaiming your reality. It's all about providing tools for awareness and recognition, because you can't possibly address a pattern that you can't see or even name.
Awareness starts with 2 really practical mental tools. These are designed to help you analyze the dynamic objectively, to step outside of the emotion. The first is called the Standards Exchange Audit, and the second is Secular Boundary Awareness.
Let's look at that first tool, the Standards Exchange Audit. This is basically a series of simple but really powerful questions you can ask yourself. Is grace a one-way street here? Are they totally exempt from the rules they hold you to, while you're held to a standard of perfection? When there's a disagreement, who gets to define what's right? Is their outrage the final word, or does your perspective even matter? And finally, what's the real goal of any conflict? Is it to achieve dominance, or is it to actually find some mutual understanding? The point here isn't to confront them with this, it's to give yourself some clarity.
The second tool is called Secular Boundary Awareness. This is a technique for your own mind. It just means you intentionally strip all the moral language away from a problem. So instead of thinking, "I'm so selfish for wanting a night off," you reframe it in plain, non-moral language. "I need to rest because I have worked for 10 days straight." See? This separates the practical issue from the manufactured character judgment and helps diffuse that intense emotional charge.
And this leads us to maybe the most crucial reframing of all. Your shame is not proof of your failure. It does not mean you are a bad person. It is a predictable, biological response to some very sophisticated social engineering. Just understanding that can interrupt the whole cycle. It moves you from self-blame towards self-understanding. You start to realize you don't have to be perfect to be safe.
And that brings us to our final thought. Someone who uses the concepts of right and wrong to make you feel small and broken is not an ethical guide. They are a warden. Real ethics empower you to be honest. They don't force you to be silent. The most dangerous cages out there aren't made of iron bars. They're made of perceived purity. Your mind is your own, and awareness is the key to making sure no one else's definition of good becomes a cage for your humanity.